The following is a conversation with Stephen Campbell, founder of tinyacquisitions.com, a platform and marketplace where you can buy and sell all kind of digital projects and digital assets. I hope you enjoy this conversation.
Okay, so I consider myself a creative entrepreneur. I could call myself a founder, I guess, or if I was treating what I was doing as a business, like a formal structure, I could call myself a CEO. But I don't think CEO, founder really captures the essence of what I try to do. It's more of a maker or being a creative person who happens to use business techniques or who had to found a company to get to the end result. So I would say I'm a creative entrepreneur, and what I'm working on now is still tiny acquisitions. It takes up most of my active time, and I wrote a book recently, so I'm in the process of marketing that and selling that, distributing it, getting it into the hands of Jamaicans who wanted to read it as well, and just getting it out there so I can share a few of my thoughts. And the goal is to really help. I think the goal of a lot of pursuits that I eventually take on is to help persons to think differently or to change their mindset or to be an example to show them that, hey, here's something that you haven't thought about before, or maybe if you go from this angle, maybe you get a different result. So I think most of my pursuits are surrounded by that.
Okay, and you have more an engineering background or a process engineer, something like that. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. That's what I studied, and I practiced for some time as well. I really love process engineering, and I think what process engineering does, it can be spread across multiple industries. Right. So you find process engineers leaving plants and going to banking and finance. They might go into software, all areas, business as well, because it's that type of field that gives you problem solving skills. But in its purest form, it's about optimizing an industrial process, right? And that's what we learned in school.
Okay, so when we talk about tiny acquisitions, or maybe you can explain really quick, what is tiny acquisitions? What are the customers? How does it work? And then we can maybe talk a little bit how you actually, as far as I understand it, use primarily no-code tools to build it, or build most of your products, as far as I can remember what I heard from you so far.
Yeah, so tiny acquisitions is just a marketplace where sellers, and those sellers being makers, hopefully, and developers can sell their digital assets, whether it's a small app, could be a mobile app, a web app, even a digital product like a course, or anything that's digital, a piece of code, and they can get money for that from a buyer, and that buyer being maybe a person who's already in business, having an established business, or a maker themselves who needs this small thing or something that they see valuable that can be an addition to their business, or they want to take over this thing and bring it to the next level. That was the intention of creating this marketplace, to create some sort of exchange between makers, because the original problem that I identified in the maker space was that us as makers tend to move from idea to idea, and we leave a lot of projects dead when we try to pursue new ideas. So liquidating some of these projects would be to the benefit of moving to that next idea, because I realized you can't stop a maker from being a maker. as the maker mindset, they have to jump to a new idea. So maybe getting some cash from the previous idea would be very helpful in them pursuing the maker mindset.
Okay, so basically you took like, okay, the maker is bored with the current project, but instead of just shelving it and collecting dust, put it on the marketplace, maybe there's someone interested in buying it at the current, maybe half finished development state kind of things. That
Could be
fair to say
half,
so far?
Yes, it could be half developed, could be fully developed and launched. We've seen some of those sell as well. And it could be launched making money, but not enough money, or making enough money, but the maker wants to move on to something else, you know. So we kind of try to, it's still very niched, it's still niched down based on pricing. Less than $100,000 is the acquisition window, but there are two categories there: less than $10,000, and that will capture the sellers that I described earlier, and greater than $10,000, and 10,000 means the selling price, greater than $10,000 up to $100,000, and these projects would be for those sellers who, you know, have established their projects but still want an exit, and a little higher exit than 10K.
Okay, so is it fair to say that it's a little less, or that you're less focused on acquisition or merger of companies, but rather than projects? So it's more on a project level, meaning maybe a GitHub repository, maybe in an app or code base or email list or website or whatever, instead of I'm buying a complete company. Is that fair to say?
That's exactly what it is. So we call them tiny projects. We don't call them startups or companies.
Okay, so it doesn't need to be in a legal structure in an LLC or something. It could really be a hobby project of a person and turning that into potentially an exit.
Exactly.
Okay. From what I heard so far is that that Tiny Acquisitions doesn't has a revenue model at the moment, meaning you don't monetize the transactions or the business that is done on your platform. Basically, you connect basically the buyer and the seller, and then they can do the rest by themselves. Is that correct so far? Okay, so then maybe my information is outdated.
So we started, so maybe the information that you got, we started that way, but maybe 4 months or 3 months into operating Tiny, we monetized. So how we monetize is we take a commission from each transaction.
Okay.
A small commission, and we take that from the seller's portion. Right. So the buyer would make a payment, and we just take a commission from what the seller would get.
Okay.
And so and we also have a subscription model for buyers. So the buyer gets access to certain metrics and gets to contact the seller by becoming a member of Tiny Acquisitions. And so they pay a membership fee, and they get access to more details and access to the seller.
Okay. And when I heard first about it, I was thinking that that's probably the best or the easiest and reasonable way to monetize it or to generate revenue. So does that mean that you also kind of monitor or help them with the complete transaction process? Is the money transaction done through you? Do you have an escrow process, maybe something like that? Maybe you can just, let's say I want to acquisition from you, or a project from you that you host or offer on Tiny Acquisition. I would buy that. Maybe you can guide me through the different steps. So how would that process for me look like when I want to buy a project, and maybe also the seller side? What are you doing? Do you just establish the connection, and then we do all the negotiation, the buyer and the seller on their own, and agree on a price, or how is the process going?
Okay, so the first aspect is the listing process. So the seller lists and they identify what category they want to be in terms of listing price. So if it's less than 10,000 US dollars, they want to list for 10,000 unless they list for free. And once we review that project and approve it, it goes onto the marketplace. If it's over 10,000 US, there's a small fee, a $15 fee, where we do a little bit more checks just to ensure that the project, you're asking for more money, so we do a little bit more checks to ensure that it's legitimate. And then once we review, we approve for the marketplace. So a buyer comes along and they are interested. They have paid the membership fee and they have access to send a message to the seller. We have the functionality for them to send a message on platform. The seller receives the message and a notification via an email, and they can discuss, what assets they want to exchange, and they have the option to make an offer. The seller accepts the offer that they want based on the talking back and forth, and they are funneled into our exchange process. No, it's not a formal escrow because we are not, that's not our business, but we do facilitate the exchange on platform. And we have another platform that we have built as well, which supports Tiny Acquisition. Is our escrow, our exchange platform, and everything happens there. So the buyer, the buyer's offer is accepted, and the seller generates an invoice, right? The buyer makes the payment comes to us. We hold those funds until they exchange. Once the buyer has received all the assets, they indicate that, hey, I have received everything. You can go ahead and release the funds, and we release the funds to the seller. Wire transfer, we can do it via Stripe Connect as well, because Stripe is what we use for our payment processing. And ACH, we have many methods, PayPal as well, and we get the funds to the seller, and the transaction is complete after that.
Okay. Maybe that ties into my next question, or the next topic, and I'm interested in your experience and your thoughts on the whole payment or online payment infrastructure or situation, especially when we're looking at the Caribbean. So basically a US LLC or a European company, you can, or most other countries in the world, to be honest, can, without any big problem, just open a Stripe account, connect it to your bank account, and then basically build a platform or a marketplace like Tiny Acquisitions. For someone in Jamaica, can be a really big problem and a really big hurdle, as you probably know, if I'm interpreting your head nodding correctly.
That's true.
So
it's true.
You can share some ideas or some experience that you had, and maybe some tips for someone in Jamaica or in the Caribbean in general, how to basically get connected to the global payment infrastructure.
So it's how you set up your payment processing is dependent on the direction you want your business to go in. If you're a local business owner and you want your business to be local and it's registered on the island, in the island of Jamaica, I think you might want to go through the banks. The thing about that is going to be very difficult, right? I think the banks have a lot of prerequisites. You have to even have certain revenue to get access to certain features and so on. And it's very difficult for someone who is just starting out with nothing. They have an idea and they want to build something and they want to collect payment. And the bank is saying, hey, you have to have revenue before we can give you access to that,
Right.
to this. So inherently, it's not.
Which is a problem when you want to build a business which is primarily online and needs
which is
that.
primarily online, right? So that's a challenge. But I'm saying this with a grain, take this with a grain of salt, because I approach things based on what I see what the rule book says, right? So if I see something online, or I walk into a bank or I walk into a business space and I ask at the front desk, what's the process? I go with that process. Maybe there's another process that I don't know about, right? But we leave that there. How to approach this as a local person? It's important to set up a business, a legal business in the USA, since most of the clients on the internet will come from the US. It might sound biased, but with all the websites that I've ever built, most of the traffic comes from the USA. That's just how it is. Especially when you're engaging in business, most of the clients that will pay will come from the USA. So setting up a business in the USA and us being in such close proximity is beneficial to do so, right? Once that legal entity is set up in the USA, can be a LLC, can be a C Corp, S Corp, you can engage online now as this US registered entity. And from there, you can get payment processed through all the providers that give access to US-based companies.
Yeah, that's usually what I tell people or recommend someone, that you usually don't, that you're forced to have an LLC in the US, that you can't avoid that, or as you said, C Corp, S Corp, whatever, legal entity. So how would you just do that in a practical sense? Would you recommend to use a service like, I don't know, Stripe Atlas or some other online service where you can create your LLC with bank account and so on? Or do you have to be there in person and have a physical address or something registered in the US to be able to do so? What was your experience to be able to set the infrastructure up without going into too much detail that is too revealing or probably confidential? But what would you recommend or to someone that says, okay, I understand that's the future, I want to go in that route, but again, I need to be connected to the how do I get an LLC with a bank account in the US or a C Corp? What would you recommend?
So Stripe Atlas is pretty good. I would recommend them if you think that your business will live on Stripe. But if you want to be a lot more independent, you should get the entity set up outside of Stripe, and then you can just put the details into Stripe if you still use Stripe. But there are some good services out there. I mean, if you Google them, that's what I did. I Googled some of these services and I settled on one. You can do that as well. Or if you're in person, you can get that set up. If, for example, you have a relative that lives there and you travel to and from frequently, if they have an address, then, maybe that can be used in some way in talking. And I'm not sure, but I'm guessing that if they have an address, that is a route that you may look at to try to engage with the banks or try to engage with legal entities and have them be a proxy. Because what's very important in setting up a legal entity in the US is having an address. And some of these third-party companies that allow you to set up these businesses, they legally provide a virtual address for you, right? So using these companies can work as well. And you have some really good ones out there. I think deciding on which state to set up the business in is something that you need to research, because the tax laws vary from state to state,
Right.
and certain laws for particular businesses vary from state to state. So I think it's a personal responsibility of the business owner to find out which state is the best state for me to register this business in, and who do I talk to? Is it that can I go directly to a lawyer? And that's also an option. So for me, when I was setting it up, I had to do some engagement with a local lawyer as well, to be a notary public, to notarize some documents for me.
Mm-hmm.
So there was some work and research that I had to put in to get things set up legally and properly.
Yeah, but I think that's absolutely the correct way of doing it, because what I see and heard quite often in the past is that due to the requirement, as you said, that you often need an address in some shape or form in the US, that then people not only use the address of a relative, but also the name or something to open a bank account. And then you are really quickly in an area where you can charge with tax fraud or money laundering or something. So yeah, I definitely would recommend, or make sure that everybody listening or watching, to make sure that you know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, then as you did, hire an expert, a lawyer, or someone that knows the regulations to make sure that you are on the safe side of things. But is it fair to say that with, let's say, $1,000, let's call it start capital, you basically can set up the legal infrastructure?
Definitely.
Paying a lawyer, paying the legal fees, bank fees, whatever, so that you basically have an LLC and a bank account and a Stripe account connected or something, some other infrastructure, whatever you prefer. Is that fair to say, or what would be?
I would say even $500. I mean, you could start, because I mean, I'm approaching this from someone who has an idea and isn't 100% sure if this will work yet. So you want to take a very, very little risk. So even $300 to $500, you can start as simple as Stripe Atlas. I think their fee is maybe $500.
I think it's 500, yeah.
Yeah, you can start there. And then if the business scales, you get a lawyer, you speak to a CPA or someone who has knowledge about the area, and then you move on to getting your business set up independent of Stripe. So I think starting small is important as well. And
maybe I'm mixing something up, but maybe that was how I got actually, or you caught my attention. Might that be the case when you posted something about how you does the Stripe credit or Stripe cash, or basically for people don't know that basically when you have a Stripe account and after some time or basically some revenue, some payment processed, so basically Stripe want to see, hey, there is some regular revenues, regular payments, and then you get a credit line or you qualify for a certain amount of loan or credit. And I'm not sure if that was you, but I'm 80% sure. So yeah, that I think that was a Twitter post of you, and that caught my attention. That then I went down the rabbit hole of tiny acquisition and so on.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, which I think is a great. Yeah, first very interesting, and the great feature basically, because I think, as you said in that post, is that it can be really hard for a Jamaican or Caribbean in general, startup, founder, maker, however you want to call it, to get access to financing, and basically with very little effort and very little bureaucracy, you can get a loan or startup financing from a company like Stripe just by proving that you have some revenue, compared to the process that you have to go through a local bank. That is a big difference as far as I can tell from what I'm hearing.
It is. I mean, I think the internet empowers the regular person. Right. It's just a matter of going after the knowledge because it's there. Others are doing it, and it's a matter of being industrious and being innovative and pursuing it. So the tools are there to help us.
Yeah, and I guess that's probably where you are. Or let me rephrase that. I think that's where the whole no code, opportunity or movement or idea or however you want to call it comes into place, because I assume as a process engineer, or at least I'm seeing some similarities to me here, is I'm very much focused on, okay, what is the problem and what are the tools that I can use to solve that problem? That I'm way more focused on the outcome than on the actual tools that I'm using. And when I first started to get more into tech and working with startups and tech companies and so on, I was pretty surprised that a lot of the tools that are used, or even used on the back end, very standardized tools, and has nothing to do with coding or what the normal layman would understand of tech at all, besides something drag and drop and something that you do in your other apps that you use as a consumer on a normal basis. Anyway, of course, there's a little more to it, but very, very simple in compared to the hacker movies that, where they sit and put down some command line stuff or some HTML code, and then you have a website or something. That's just not necessarily, of course you can do that, but it's definitely not necessarily. So I guess what I want to get to is, I think most people are not aware of how easy and accessible the tools are, as you said, to the layman, to the end consumer, for a normal person. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, or about your experience as also someone. I think you don't have a IT or computer science background. You're basically self-taught, as far as I can tell, when it comes to the use of the tools or programming or things of that nature. So what is your opinion or thought on, okay, how much is actually the ability or the skill of solving a problem or providing a service or a solution to a marketplace, and then using the existing tools to solve that problem, compared to what, as far as I can tell, most developers or most tech people focus on is, okay, I build or create the next tool or next platform and build that from ground up, especially from the background, again, that we're talking about, Caribbean listener, probably with little access, or maybe little access to finance, maybe little access to education, and maybe even infrastructure, from financing to stable internet access and so on. So a long topic, long-winded question, but I hope you get what I'm trying to get to.
I think I can tackle it from the perspective of not focusing too much on no code, but saying that, because I'm not obsessed with no code. I haven't become this lover of no code that when I'm 50 years old, I'm still talking about no code. I'm 29 now, just for perspective, right? So I'm not obsessed with it. What I'm really obsessed with is the result that I need, right? Now, I have a high school level information technology understanding. Now I am sharpening those skills, right? Because if I know no code, I would say I'm very good at no code now. I could manipulate a website built on Bubble very easily. But if I start to become comfortable there and say, oh, this is the future of tech, I don't need to learn anything else, pretty soon the tide is going to shift and I'm going to be left behind. So I'm sharpening my skills, but generally I have a high school level IT understanding. So I understand simple logic, if, then, else, right? And I don't think if you understand logic, it will be difficult for you to build something online, because the tools are there now that takes your logical understanding and allows you to produce something in real, digitally, not in real life, but digitally. And it can be significant. I think my approach has been more of a business approach. I am running a business which just happens to be a technology business, which happens to be a software business. I can't hire someone to do this for me, so I must learn it, right? And that kind of thinking, Daniel Vassallo is one of the persons I really, is it Vassallo on Twitter is one of the persons who I look up to. He's an excellent maker. He's a software engineer himself, but he always talks about living like a cockroach then, you know, doing everything just to survive and, you know, doing what it takes to not return to a 9 to 5. And he always says he's bad for the economy because when he talks about that, you know, persons leave their jobs and start going down this path. But he's right. Like, one of my motivations is I don't want to go back to a 9 to 5. If I had to, I would. I'm not against 9 to 5, but I keep on doing things that would keep me from going back to that. And one of them so happens to be learning no code and building tiny acquisitions from which I can pay myself a salary every few weeks, and it keeps me going. So if that changes, I'll have to do something else. So I'm not hooked particularly on one particular thing. My mindset is to live a lifestyle that, or the vision of what my life should be. That's really what I want to get at. So if I have to become a farmer, I will become a farmer in the future, just to maintain that vision of what the outcome should be.
Yeah, I think that's, well, first of all, I really have to congratulate you on the fact that, at least from my perspective, you are one of the very few Jamaicans that call themselves tech entrepreneurs that actually have built a tech business that uses tech that actually has some revenue, and as far as I can tell, clients or customers from all over the world, and actually a product or products, if you want to. And I absolutely agree with the fact that the tools are, as you said, there, and they are more there to achieve a business goal or to achieve an outcome. So I think you use Bubble a lot.
Yeah,
is that correct so far?
right.
What are some tools or some approaches or frameworks that you would recommend to the other Caribbean or Jamaican makers or entrepreneurs or founders in general, where they can really, with some, as you said, basic skills and then first principle thinking and logical thinking and problem solving skills, using these tools to really build a valuable product?
I think if you want to solve a problem, you have to know what the problem is. You know, so for example, tiny acquisition solves a problem for someone who wants to sell something online, without which it will be more difficult for them to sell that thing online.
Right.
So it should be easier for you to sell that thing on tiny acquisitions than it is for you to make a post on Twitter and have it sold, right? So I would have to attract buyers that I can alert when your project comes in. So I need an email service, right? Which is one of the fundamental services of our business. If my service doesn't have the ability to send an email, I do not have a business, right?
I would argue that might be the most valuable part of your business, the email list or the database of your customers.
It is, and it's valued. It's probably valued in the hundreds of thousands of US dollars, and I'm not just putting that out there. It is, valued in
Agree.
hundreds of thousands of US dollars. I mean, if we didn't have that email list, we wouldn't have a business. That's why persons list, right? And that's why buyers come on, because persons list, right? So,
And correct me, sorry for interrupting, correct me if I'm wrong, you're basically building also with Tiny Acquisitions two lists. You build your buyers list and you build your sellers list. Is that correct so far?
exactly.
Meaning you also have them you have different segments of audience and of list that you're actually building and can serving in the future.
Right. So in building it out, I would have to think about how do I position our business to attract sellers, and how do I position the business to attract buyers? Because marketplaces are not easy. They always talk about the chicken and egg problem of marketplaces.
Right.
You know, it's not easy. So I had to decide initially that, well, a buyer wouldn't come to look at an empty list of projects. So maybe I need 100 projects first.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have to tailor the narrative or the content toward attracting the sellers. So this is a business that allows sellers to, once we have projects, hey buyers, here's where you can find, and then we make that kind of messaging. So I think that focusing on the problem, what the problem is, and then thinking next, what tool do I need? So maybe an email service provider could be like a SendGrid, which we use, and then sending out an email to 11,000 people, which we do every week. We use ConvertKit. So before I needed to do that, I never needed ConvertKit. But once I had that problem, I would go after that tool. So in the future, if there's another problem that arises, for example, cybersecurity, right? As the marketplace grows, you have bad actors that try to short circuit the system and try to get money across from one side to the other, maybe using a card that's not theirs. So, you know, with that, I would have to say, what tool or what approach do I need to have to mitigate against that problem? So it's an approach where you're solving a problem each time.
Yeah. Does it mean, or is it fair to say that you don't need any coding, software development skills to use these tools?
It is fair to say that.
Yeah,
You don't need any. It is fair because you can become so proficient at pinning tools together that you'll never even need to use a JavaScript snippet. I do use JavaScript snippets, and I've had to learn how to
copy and paste.
Right.
Sorry.
But I think maybe what you have to understand though is API calls.
Yeah.
Currently in our dispensation of tech, everything is built with putting API calls together.
Right.
I mean, if you have even one company, tech company, one department has an endpoint for the other department, and that's how they fit the company together. Right. So understanding API call maybe is the most important thing, and probably the only thing that you need to understand to have something successful.
Yeah. So that's basically the ability to make the tools talk to each other and interact with each other in layman's terms. So you don't have to need the ability to build the tools themselves, but as soon as you know how to use them and how to make, connect them to each other, I think that's 99% of the way already there.
That's correct.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about AI and your GPT-3 experiences and where the whole thing is going? Or do you want to talk a little bit more about how you actually get started with Tiny Acquisitions? Give you a little bit more what you want to talk about.
I'm not sure I want to talk about GPT-3 because it's out there, yes. and it's being used, it's powerful, and I've done it. I've dabbled with it, and I've sold a startup, a project, sorry, to a startup. And yeah, it's there. But I think a lot of persons might be chasing the shiny object thing, and they really don't, how do I say, the utility that it provides has already been done. It's there already. There's nothing more to build on top of GPT-3, right? It generates copy. It helps you with your writing tasks, and there are very good tools out there, right? It does what it needs to do already. I don't think you could take it and do something new with it, right? Similarly, graphic generative AI, we are seeing where persons can generate profile pictures with it, and avatars and so on, and it does what it's supposed to do. But that's it. I think the conversation needs to go to what next? How do we get this technology to help another era in our lives? How can we get it to make our lives easier? And just maybe that is for the engineers to think about, right? So I'm not chasing the shiny object anymore. I'm more thinking about how can I solve a next problem, because most of the things that are done out there, they have reached the limits. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay,
I don't know if I'm wrong. Yeah.
Okay, let me push back there a little, okay, and share my opinion. When I understand you correctly, you say, okay, like AI tools like GPT-3 and comparable tools in other sectors like graphic and so on are more or less at their capability limits, and everything that goes from there is more a software, more engineering problem like general AI. And we can dive about the whole AI philosophy talk later if you want to, but just from a practical use case, we are at the limits. Is that fair? Your standpoint summarized roughly?
Yeah, on a general note,
okay,
that using the endpoints, using the API endpoints from these companies.
Okay, because for example, and I'm not a very creative person, but I can think of a way how just the tools we talked about can, and I mentioned that a few months ago when I had first access to the tools, that they really can put $1 billion industry out of business. For example, let's take the tool GPT-3. Let's take a tool that takes the voice input and turns that into an image. We already have the software to also take the voice, the input, and turn that into a video or into spoken language, meaning in a few years, it will be probably someone taking these tools, connecting them together and offering a movie as a service thing where you basically just tell the software, or you can speak that in a microphone or type that in, the input is not relevant, but basically tell the AI and say, hey, I want to watch a movie with that, I don't know, a Western with that theme and whatever kind of movie type I want to watch. Then the AI takes that input, creates a script out of that, renders the movie for that in photorealistic, and the graphic gets better and better. So that's also just a matter of time how we get there. Then we really have photorealistic humans and language and so on. And literally every time a user logs on into the Netflix account or whatever the service will be that offers that in the future, you can get a unique movie and video based on your mood, on your specifications, maybe even based on your taste, on what you watched in the past and all that stuff. And Hollywood is out of the business right now, because why should I spend $500 million to produce a movie that an AI can produce in 30 seconds based on an input. That's just my thoughts, that we are maybe just at the beginning, how we can really understand how we can use the tools. So I think, like, because compared to 20 years ago when the internet was just starting, people also couldn't think about that we have video conferencing right now for basically no cost, and live streaming. What was $1 million studio in the past is now also basically free for everybody with a smartphone and an internet connection. So I think that we are probably just at the beginning, that smart people take the tools and make really great stuff out of that. That's probably what I want to say with
yeah, I think it's becoming, I think we have to lean more towards creativity. I take some of your points. I think I was talking about where it is now and how makers are interacting with it. I think makers might be thinking that they can extract more value out of what is there now in terms of from the API calls. But I think it's pretty set in stone. And as creative individuals, we can extract no more from AI in and of itself, using maybe algorithms, right? So I think we'd have to dig a bit deeper, but I definitely agree that it will upset maybe every industry, right? And I think we will now be forced to just input our creativity, and then it will take all the hard, steps from there. So yeah, I hear you, and I take your points.
Yeah, it's an interesting question in the sense of what will be the role of the human in the future, and what will be the role of software or AI or algorithms. At the end of the day, it's all just different terms for different complexity or different levels of complex software. And I agree to the sense that the ability of problem solving and creativity, as you mentioned, are probably the main differentiators, because what I just see from the graphic and image creating AIs and so on, that's like a human can never create an image that fast. So now it's just, okay, what is the input? How sophisticated is someone in using the tool and actually creating someone with it? Is creative with the input and tweaking, and then going to the borders of the capabilities of the tools and maybe combine new tools together. I think that will be more important in the future, probably, could be wrong, than things like the actual coding or engineering of software itself, because I also think that probably that will be also a job of AI and other software in the future, because I think the whole no-code movement is basically that, like, okay, I tell the software only what I want. Okay, I don't know, I design a website and I want the button in the left corner of the website, and I don't have to write some code. I just take the button, put it there, say, make the button red, and that's basically it.
No code is a prophecy.
Right. I think that goes a little in that direction. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. What else do I have noted here? Yeah, what are your future plans with tiny acquisitions, or where do you see maybe the whole marketplace? Because what I find, or what primarily also caught my attention, was the fact that with my finance background or banking background, I found it fascinating that you try to kind of standardize, or at least make accessible, a market that is by nature very illiquid and very intransparent, and usually only accessible to way higher volumes of transaction volume or acquisition volume than what we're seeing on your platform. So what was the idea maybe in the first place, and what is your, after you faced reality after a few years, what is your plan today for the next few years?
The idea was just to help makers get these exits. The reality, not a lot of makers list that I think a few weeks ago, we did an experiment where we started uh, a discovery arm to our platform where we would find deals for buyers. And what really hit me was that there were so many deals that were not on marketplaces. So even in our ecosystem, there are sellers who will never list, and their projects are really good. And the funny thing is, they do want to sell if they got the right offer, but they'll never list. So I think that reality is not something that you can push and really solve by having a marketplace alone, right? There has to be a way to get directly to these persons one-on-one and say, are you willing to sell? And then that sparks a conversation, because just imagine a town and there is a restaurant here, there is a supermarket there, and it's all small stores, right? If the business owner would accept, say, $20 million for their business, they would accept that, but they don't know it.
That someone would buy it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Would they put an ad in the Gleaner or the newspaper saying, I would accept $20 million for this business? But they would accept it if someone came up to them. So I guess where I'm getting at is we are still evolving, and we still want to solve the real problem. The problem that we're trying to solve is not to build a marketplace. That's not the problem that we're trying to solve.
Right.
The problem that we're trying to solve is to get sellers to exits and get buyers to acquire businesses, right? And if the marketplace just achieves 30% of that, we have to get the next, let's say, 60% that's attainable, right? Let's say 100% is not attainable. We have to get to that 60% and fix and solve that problem. So we're still focusing on that problem. And we'll continue to solve that problem until something changes. Let's say we exit, or let's say we pivot. We still try to focus on solving that problem. And my main goal is the user of the platform, the customer, the creative person that uses the platform, to give them the value that they come for. So that's the focus.
Okay, before we wrap this up, why do you think that people don't list their projects? Because as far as I understood it, they are already signed up on your platform as a potential seller, right? But they don't list the project that they actually have on your platform.
Some of them are not sellers. Some of them are lurkers, right? Some persons will be watching the acquisition space and they don't have a problem just continuing with their project. Let's say the project is making 15,000 US a month, and they have a 90% profit margin on that. Why? There's nothing that would encourage me to let it go, unless someone comes and say, I'll give you $1 million. And well, that makes sense, you know. So they're just kind of indifferent, and you have to urge them now to sell, you know. So yeah, that's what I think.
Okay, so is it that they think they can't get a right offer, high enough offer potentially, or that they feel that their product at the current stage isn't valued enough or functional enough? because I would at least, maybe I'm just naive here, but I would at least wanted to know where my project or my product or my company or whatever that I'm potentially thinking about selling, I really at least wanted to know the potential selling price, right? Or maybe I'm thinking
I
too
think a
simple
good
here.
I think a good example was the recent sale of Figma, just scaled
With
down
Adobe,
to
yeah.
smaller terms. Persons posted like original tweets from the founder and says, we are not trying to be Adobe. We are here to solve this problem. But obviously, they got an offer that made sense.
That they couldn't refuse.
That they couldn't refuse. So there are some acquisitions that happen not because the seller is highly motivated to sell. If you had your dream house in the community that you have always wanted to live in, and that's where your children grow up, and someone comes up with a life-changing offer.
Right. Okay.
Then I would start to consider that, hey, maybe we could sell. You can go to even a more comfortable place than here and still have some funds to get a 10-year runway, then it would make sense, So I think understanding the psychology of what happens with acquisitions as well, because we don't know everything. And as we are in the business, we are learning. We start out thinking that we're solving the problem until we realize, 90% of the persons here actually don't get a sale. Are we really solving the problem? Or are we just happy with having a marketplace and saying that we're solving the problem? So being obsessed with solving the problem and getting to that solution, I think, pushes the business forward.
Yeah, I think you have a cool project there, and I think it's very promising, especially, again, considering the background where you coming from or working in, rather. I think that's fair to say. So before we wrap this up, is there anything else you want to talk about or to mention, or where can people contact you or find Tiny Acquisitions? Maybe you want to plug that. Anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm mostly on Twitter and LinkedIn. Stephen Campbell on LinkedIn. Stepo Campbell, STEPO Campbell _ on Twitter, and I share my thoughts online from time to time. And there are certain things that I have learned, and I try to put them out there to help others to learn. Initially, I started putting things out on Twitter as an experiment, but sometimes I'm trying to get my fellow countrymen, persons in the Caribbean, to see the problem that we have in the Caribbean a little bit differently. And so you can look out for me there. I've put some of my thoughts in also. I've written a book, shameless plug, themakermindset.com. You can read some of my thoughts there, and it just points to how to approach the maker journey, and pitfalls and some things to apply to avoid pitfalls so you can be successful on the journey.
Great. I didn't know that you are also an author. So everybody listening or watching, we will definitely put the links to the book, to the website, to your social media handles in the show notes and in the description down there. So that's it so far from my side. Thanks for taking the time, and all the best with Tiny Acquisitions, and I hope we will see a lot of it in the future.
Thank you very much, Simon, and thanks for inviting me and having me.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and I hope to see you next time.